I started playing flag football when I was about 7 years old. So I was around second grade, first grade, and started doing that and had played all throughout middle school, high school, and up to college at the University of Texas.
Chris Terry is the assistant strength coach for Liberty football. His journey on the gridiron has been one of physical and spiritual strengthening.
High school was just being the best football player I could be, but that was pre-salvation. And so I was a good kid, but I was just living for myself and living for being a good kid and a good teammate. And then when I was saved and then went to University of Texas, that's when there was like a shift where it became something else and something more. And God graciously took away football my senior year. I was injured with my knee and I couldn't play the rest of that season. And so there was a clash. I said, well, if I can't contribute on the field right now, what am I gonna do? There was an identity crisis in that moment. So even as a believer, I still struggle with that. And so there was that shift where it's like, okay, I can still do this. I can still invest in other people. One of my spiritual gifts that God has given is encouragement.
But just as Chris's faith was flourishing, he would face his most difficult test.
Your parents are superheroes when you're growing up. You think as a kid that your parents are always going to be there. You know, it wasn't until my junior year. We had just got done playing Ole Miss. Ironically, Coach Freeze was there and played him in Austin, and got out of the stadium and was walking Mom back to the car. And that's when Dad noticed that she was having a little harder time getting to the car and breathing heavily. And he said, okay, I'm taking her to the doctor again. And found out that, you know, it wasn't pneumonia or anything like that. Like, she actually had metastatic breast cancer, so it spread to all of her body. And it was a dim, you know, diagnosis. She only had, doctors said, a few months to live. And so that just rocked me as a player. Here I am, my last few years, struggling off and on with injuries. And then on top of this, now my whole world is rocked, and my mother, is dying in front of us. Mom graciously lived for another 6 years until she ended up passing away. So it was a long process where we knew Mom had this and she lived with it. And so when she passed away in February of 2020, we were like, okay, like, she suffered enough. Like, it's time for her. We knew where she was going.
His mother's passing brought sadness, but it also brought transformation within his family, a transformation with eternal consequences.
I lived with my dad for 3 months, and I was just so concerned about, you know, how his heart was, how he was doing after losing Mom. I saw a shift towards the end of that fall. And we started becoming more invested in not just church attendance, but like fellowship. Started seeking out, okay, well, where's a Bible study where I can be around other men who have walked through the same thing?
After a short season with his father, Chris would move back to Houston. And while he was still in the process of trying to recover from the loss of his mother, tragedy would strike again.
In January of 2021, our whole world was rocked again. My little brother was like, hey, have you heard from Dad at all? I said, no, like, haven't heard anything. That's when the police in College Station did a check on the house, and my father ended up having a heart attack earlier that week. And that was when, even as a believer in that moment, I was like, are you serious, God? Like, we had just lost, you know, our mother. I just, you know, it hadn't even been a year since we lost her, and just started feeling like we were walking through some deep depression from that. And then this happens. And I remember going back to my house in Houston at the time, and I just have all of a sudden just this rage built up, and I take my bed and I flip it, and I just get down on my knees. I'm like, God, why? And then after that, I said, okay, I'm good. And it was at that moment where God even met me in that moment. He said, hey, I love you. And even though your father and mother are not here anymore, like, I'm going to show you in this moment how I'm going to be even more of a real father to you and a parent to you. You had great parents, but I'm going to even show you a different side of me now. That's something that you didn't know when your parents were around, where I'm going to be a father to the fatherless to you.
These hard experiences have fostered growth in Chris's life, and he hopes the perspective that he has gained is something he can help pass on to the players he now coaches.
You have the physical and the spiritual, and this is going to be my 8th year of coaching and being around football, since I was 7 or 6. And but I've just seen over the years, especially as a coach, that players who excel spiritually and know their true identity in Jesus actually perform better as players, because there isn't this constant tension of, if I don't perform well, then I'm not accepted. This is a beautiful redemption point where not only I get to be their coach, but also their friend, and maybe an older brother or father that they look up to. And so it's just the day-to-day, how I go about serving them, how I coach them up. So discipleship just simply looks like, hey, each week, like, tell me about your week. How did that go when you went home and spent time with your family? I know it's been really hard, and just applying scripture to that. And so that's how we pour into our players.